What's up, guys? I wanted to welcome you to the Tank Online. If this is your first time, we're so glad you're here. If it is your first time, just a little bit of info. In a moment, we'll share a quick little story from the Bible, and then we'll have a little bit of time to process that story, talk about that story in the chat with each other. What I love about this platform is you can talk with your friends on here in the chat about the story. But you can also talk with other people that you might not know. Like if you're a sixth grader, you get to hear about what a senior in high school thinks about this story, which I think is kind of cool. But the other thing is there are small group leaders on this platform, some of them you guys know, that would love to talk about all this with you. And so you'll see them kind of like reflecting on the story as well. Also, it's never too late to just share this link with a friend. If you have a friend who you'd love to see on this platform, if you have a friend who maybe doesn't go to church but would be down and just hop on this, share them this link and just let them know that anyone can join. And so, starting today, we are kicking off a series called The You Effect. And the whole idea behind the series is talking about the influence we have on other people. So to start out, I just want you guys to go in the comments and say what comes to your mind when you think about the word influence. Like feel free to just spit out whatever you want. What comes to your mind when you think about influence? Go. I know what comes to my mind is I think of social media influencers. And I think about how crazy it is we call them influencers because, when you see people on Instagram and YouTube, they get these crazy brand deals where they're advertising for companies. And it's just all this crazy stuff where it's like, if they have this brand in their video, all of these people will just buy it just because it's freaking Jake Paul or something like that. But I want to ask you guys another question, just curious. Speaking of influencers on social media, I want you guys to guess. I have a list here of the top 10 followed accounts on Instagram. And in the comments, I want to see how many of those names you guys can get right. If you list them in the right order, that's like bonus points. But there's a top 10 people on Instagram. Go ahead now in the comments and just start naming who you think is in that top 10. Go. Okay, I'm gonna read the top 10 and see how many you guys got right. So I'll start with the top. At the top, we got Ronaldo. Number 2, we got Ariana Grande. Number 3, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Then we got Selena Gomez, Kylie Jenner, Kim Kardashian, Leo Messi, Beyonce, and Neymar Jr. Let us know in the comments how many you got right. But I think when we think about influence, sometimes we think about the people with a big platform like that. But what we're talking about in this series is us. Like, what is the influence we have as just everyday people who don't have millions of followers? But what I want you to think about right now in your head is, who is someone who's had a huge impact on you? Someone who you see with a lot of influence. It could be someone who's just super funny, someone who's super kind, whatever it may be. And just think about it for a second in your head. I know for me, when I was in high school, there was this guy I looked up to. His name was Chris. I was a freshman and I think he was a junior or something like that. And I think I met him originally through church and through Young Life. But he was just one of those guys where everyone in school kind of just looked up to. Like, he just kind of did his own thing, but whatever he did, it was just cool. It wasn't like a cocky thing from him. He was cool. I remember we had, I think it was a fishbowl assembly, and Chris and some of his friends, for some reason, like halfway through the assembly, just went out to the middle of the court on Razor scooters and like did flips and stuff. And everyone was like, "That's sick!" Like, I don't know why they did it, why they planned that in assembly, but everyone's like, "Dude, that is amazing." But it was more than just like cool things he did. Chris was someone who was just so kind, so intentional with getting to know people. He was always meeting new people, always going out his way to just make people feel like they mattered. And Chris is someone who I saw that had a huge legacy at Gig Harbor High School. He left a mark in just spreading random acts of kindness and things like that. And maybe you have friends like that in your life as well, but I think the crazy thing is that sometimes like we don't even notice how we have an influence on other people. Like, if you were to ask Chris, he probably didn't even realize how much of an impact he made on me and how much I wanted to be like him. So maybe you have friends like that, where they're just so fun to be around, so everyone wants to hang out with them. Or maybe it's someone who worked so hard that the teammates want to work harder because of them. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you know someone who has a bad influence, like someone who's so mean that people always just feel on edge when they're around them. Or maybe it's, someone who's always ticked off, and so they always just kind of bring down the mood. Or maybe you have a friend who's so loud that everyone has to like shout to just keep up with them in conversation. Whether it's a good thing or a not so good effect, here's what's true. We don't realize the influence we have on people. We don't realize either that we have an effect on people, or that we haven't actually put enough thought into how we could use the influence we have on people. And I think that's what makes this series so interesting and so tricky, because for the next couple weeks, we're gonna be talking about this idea called the you effect, how you affect the people and the situations around you. In other words, we're talking about influence. And for some of you, your influence is obvious. I mean, maybe you hold some kind of leadership position at church or at school, or you have friends and you understand that people listen to you and always take your opinion seriously in the group. Or whether it's something serious like who your friends should date, or maybe something random at just who's the best like Avengers character. Or on the other hand, some of you might say, I don't really impact or influence anyone. Like, the me effect is at 0. Maybe you're like, dude, the only impact I have is like over my family's dog, and I think he ignores me sometimes. Whatever we think, what is true is that we all actually carry an influence on people, whether we realize it or not. And so today I want to look at a story in the Bible that I think could give us a good example of using influence when you don't realize you had it to begin with. And I want to look at a book in the Bible called John. And I'm going to set the scene here. This is a story of Jesus in the Bible. So I'm just going to set the scene here for you guys. So when Jesus was traveling around in his 3 years of ministry, there were always crowds following him. I mean, Jesus obviously had a huge influence. It could have been because people heard about Jesus and they wanted to be healed for something, or they were just kind of like curious about who he was. Whatever the reason, Jesus had a lot of influence and people were always around him. And the day we're going to look at here in the Bible is no different. And so I'm going to read John chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. It says, "Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming to him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?' He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do." So imagine the scene here. A large crowd has gathered to see this great miracle worker, Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He asks one of his disciples, Philip, what they should do. And if I were Philip, I would have been like, dude, it's lunchtime. Aren't you the miracle guy? Like, I think this is your area of expertise. Like, Jesus, it's a Sunday. We can't have chicken sandwiches again. Like, why are you asking me what to do? But instead, Philip responds this way. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." I mean, like, in other words, Philip is like, dude, you've got to be kidding me. Like, if we're gonna feed everyone here, someone's gotta have a lot of cash for that to happen. It's like you're going through the drive-thru at McDonald's and you're like, I'm gonna take 5,000 McDoubles. I promise it's not for a YouTube video. There's actually 5,000 people over here that need to be fed. It also reminds me of when I would work with Matt and Jessica, when we'd work at the Harbor Ridge student store, and some of you guys would come up there and be like, I'm gonna buy Takis for my whole table, or like Mentos, whatever it may be. And we'd be like, dude, you're a good friend. I don't know where you got that money, but all right. And we'd slide over their mound of Takis. But I just think it's crazy, right? Philip's like, Jesus, what are you talking about? There's 5,000 people here. How are we gonna do this? The story goes on. In John 6, verses 8 and 9, it says, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? And so apparently only one mom in the entire village packed a lunch for her kid. And so this guy, Andrew, thought it was worth pointing out. It's like, yo, this kid over here's got like a Lunchables. I know it's not much, but it's super dank. It's the one where you can like make your own pizza. And it does have a Snickers bar in it. So I don't know, it's not much, but Jesus, what do you think? And that's when Jesus goes to work. Because it says in the next couple verses, it says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the signs Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, there are all kinds of questions that come up when I read this story. Like, was it buffet style? You know, where did these baskets come from? Where are you just whipping out bread from? You know, exactly did Jesus turn 5 loaves and 2 fish into enough food to feed everyone? Like, that's crazy when you think about it. But here's the most important question I think we can ask when we're reading this today is, who had the biggest impact in this passage? I mean, it's easy to see that Jesus had a ton of influence, like lots of it. I mean, by the end of this account, a large crowd was calling him a prophet because of this crazy miracle he just performed. And then there's the disciples. They were impactful just by associating with Jesus. But I think the real superstar of this story was one that you may have missed. And it's the boy with the lunch. Now, at first, it seems like the opposite though, right? Like, how could a kid with some bread and fish be influential? But the truth is, it wasn't the amount that he had that allowed him to make a difference. It was his willingness to use what he had that made him influential. I'm gonna say that again. The truth is, it wasn't the amount of food that this boy had that allowed him to make a difference. It was his willingness to use what he had that made him influential. And this would have been an even bigger deal in the context Jesus was living in, where children weren't even really valued at all. No one would have seen this boy as having a huge influence, but that didn't stop the boy from stepping up. And it was his willingness to do that it ended up impacting thousands of people. I mean, can you imagine how the conversation went with his mom when they got home that afternoon? Like, Yeah, there were thousands of people there, and they picked up my Lunchable that you gave me. Like, people were dipping my nachos and like passing it out to 5,000 people. Like, no one, not even his mom, could have imagined things going that way. But they did. And thousands of years later, here we are telling this actual story. Like, I bet this kid and everyone around this kid never thought that influence like this would be a part of his story. I mean, it didn't even matter that the kid didn't take a stage. He wasn't well known, have some crazy leadership position. He wasn't some speaker or preacher. He wasn't super athletic, super popular or academic. He wasn't cool or interesting enough that we wouldn't even know his name. Like, think about it. In the story, we don't even know the guy's name, the kid. I mean, Jesus wasn't looking for any of that. The only thing that mattered was that the boy brought all that he had, and that was enough for Jesus. Because ultimately, this was about the power of Jesus and what Jesus was capable of doing through someone who was willing to be used and offer what he had. If you think about it, when it comes to affecting the world around you, it's all about you being willing to show up and offer what you have. But before that's possible, you have to recognize this. And this is like the one thing I want you guys to know today, is that you have more of an effect than you think. You know, imagine if the little boy listening to Jesus believed that he had no effect on the situation. There'd be no story to tell. Like, if the boy was like, no, I just have like a couple loaves of bread, like there's nothing to offer. If he didn't realize he could have had an effect, we wouldn't have this story today. And I think in the same way, sometimes in life, we feel like we have nothing to bring to the table. And we look down on ourselves, we think nothing of ourselves, that we don't have the potential to affect anything. I mean, there are so many stories and opportunities we could be missing out on, though, as a result of doing that. And I think the way we see influence needs to change. I think it's time that we begin to realize that having influence and impact is really just being willing to do something with what you have, no matter how big or small what you have is. In other words, having impact isn't about having more, doing more, or knowing more people. It's about offering what you have to those around you. It's about choosing to believe, even when it seems unbelievable, that you can actually have an effect on your friend group. You can actually have an effect on your section of the band. You can actually have an effect on your teammates, on your siblings, on your classmates. Like, all of you can. And then, I mean, just imagine what God could do with you, with the you effect in the world around you. Like, even if that feels impossible or seems like that you can't have a ton of effect, just allow your mind to consider that possibility that what Jesus did with a little boy's lunch is something he could do with your influence. And as you think about it, here's just a couple steps I want you guys to think about going into this week. The first thing is identify the who. Like, who are the immediate people in front of you that you have the potential to influence? Who are the people closest to you? Maybe it's your siblings, a friend, a teammate, or people in your family. That's the first thing. Identify the who. Second thing, identify the need, like the what. Like, what is it that people around you need? Is it a little bit of encouragement? Is it time? Someone to listen? Someone to help them with homework even? And then the third thing is identify what you can do to help and then do it. I mean, like, not all of us can do everything, but all of us can do something to help. And now I want to flip that on the other side. Before we're done today, I want you to think about a person in your life who has affected you in a positive way. What was it about them that allowed you to have an impact on you? How did their influence impact your life for the good? Because in the same way that others have had an impact on you, you have the same ability to have an impact on others. That's why we have things like small groups here, by the way, because the people around you have an effect on you, but you also have a good effect on them. Maybe more than you think. So the question to ask yourself right now isn't, do I have the ability to impact others? Instead, the question should be, how will I use the influence I already have? I mean, ultimately, God is the one who has the power to change people. All you have to do is show up, offer what you have, and let God do the rest. So at this time, we're going to put a couple questions on the screen for you guys to kind of process this story. I'm going to talk about it with each other. You can answer them in order, or if there's a certain question that stands out to you, you can answer that as well. And we encourage you guys to kind of like talk back and forth to each other as well. And maybe you will relate to each other in certain ways. So we'll give you guys a little bit of time to answer those questions. Hey, we just want to say thank you guys for joining us for the Tank Online. It's not the same as being in person, but we're just glad for this quick chance to be together, connect, and find some hope together. So we hope you guys have an awesome week. Stay connected with us on Instagram. We love you guys. Peace.